Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Andre and I'm your bookworm, and today we have another book review. Actually, by this time, I'm not even in this setup anymore. I'm actually in Sydney because I'm working in Sydney, and all the videos that you'll see throughout the month of March will probably be pre-recorded and posted, hopefully according to the usual time that we do this. But let's get on with this review, which is The Exile by Ryan Cahill. For the ones that don't know, The Exile is a short story that is set in the Bound and the Broken series written by Ryan Cahill, and this series has so far 3 books, if I'm not mistaken, with the 4th being published very soon. Now, The Exile is a short story written by Ryan Cahill, and it belongs to the Bound and the Broken series. I have read and reviewed the first 2 books and the first short story. You can check it out with the thumbnails or with the cards that are going by. The Bound and the Broken is an epic fantasy series. It was initially indie published, but now it has been picked to be traditionally published, which is great news. And so far it has 3 books published with a short story going in between each book, and also has, I think, 2 more books that are yet to be published. So a total of 5 main novels. This short story that I am going to review today is supposed to be read after book 2, even though it is set before the events of book 2. This short story was initially published in 2022, and on Goodreads, throughout the 3 years of existence for this short story, has gathered over 4,000 ratings with an average score of 4.55 out of 5, which is very good. Of course, it's a short story, so the ratings are usually different from what you'd consider a normal novel, or normal length novel, but nonetheless, pretty good. Let's see what I think. But before we jump into the actual review, you know the drill. We have 2 housekeeping items to go through. The first one is the synopsis. If you don't want to hear anything from it, just skip to the timestamp. You'll skip throughout that part, go directly into the review. Otherwise, stick around and you'll hear me now. Do not hesitate. Do not contemplate mercy. The Lorien Empire took everything from Dane: his family, his home, his people. He will carve a bloody path through Etheria. He will have his vengeance, by blade and by blood. This is his story, the story of the exile. And that is it. It's quite a short synopsis. I mean, it's for a short story, so you don't want to reveal too much, but it's very short not as short compared with Terry Pratchett's ones, because those are like 3 lines and that's it, but still doesn't reveal much. But anyways, let's get on to the scores of the previous books, just so we can have a sense of how the series is progressing. Now, I know that the scores look a bit weird because the prequel that I read has a really good score and then it kind of plummets to the first book. But in truth, I actually read the first book first, and it was also the first one published. And because of that, I think especially the writing wasn't yet at the potential it could have. So the score wasn't the best one, but I saw that it had a lot of potential, and I think that potential has been fulfilled already, with the second book increasing a lot in scores, and also with the prequel having quite a good score. What about this short story? Let's find out. We start our usual with plot. As the synopsis says, we follow Dane, which is a character that showed up in Of Darkness and Light, which is the second book of the series. And in this short story, pretty much follow him from his childhood up to the events just before this main series starts. In a sense, this is also partially a prequel because, again, it happens before the events of the main series, and it comes with the risks of it, like knowing exactly how the story ends, and knowing that our main protagonist won't die no matter how dire the situation seems to be, and that kind of lowers the stakes. But I think that Ryan Cahill nonetheless was able to create an engaging plot. I think from the childhood moment where we could see the situations that shaped Dane to start becoming who he would be, to later on to the decisions he made or didn't do to then become the person he is in the main series. There might not be crazy plot twists. There are still some, but I wouldn't say they're unpredictable and surprising. They are an itsy bitsy predictable, but I think Ryan Cahill was able to keep the plot flowing constantly, and for that I'm gonna give it a 4 out of 5. Now, as for characters, like I said, our main POV is Dane, and we focus solely on him throughout the story. It is a short story because this book has less than 200 pages, at least in the edition I read. And that is a very short period to establish a character, and a good way of doing it is going through their whole lives, just snapshots of the best moments, and that way you can have a good evolution of that character. And I think Ryan Cahill built a good trajectory and a good evolution for Dane with this mechanism. I think the build-up through his revenge arc really helped with the reader and getting the reader to side on his side and really root for him and think that he should succeed on his quest. And seeing that arc to completion, seeing where it led to and how Dane dealt with it and dealt with ending that arc for himself, I think was very fulfilling and revealing at the same time of who Dane is once the main series starts. And the other characters were fun. They weren't really the focus of the story, so I wasn't expecting them to be very well developed. And I think considering the length of the story, what we got was enough. So for this category, I'm gonna give it a 5 out of 5. Now moving on to world building, which I think was the category that had the least attention for this short story, which saddens me because I think the first short story that I read had tons of world building, and so I was kind of expecting us to get that from Dane's perspective, which would still be a great perspective to have because it is quite different from everyone else. But unfortunately we didn't. We go with Dane from place to place, and in my opinion, this going from place A to place B to place C felt kind of a bit generic and a bit of those like generic fantasy settings. And unfortunately, not even the magic systems were powerful or explored enough to get me engaged in this section of the short story. Not to say that they were bad, because they were not. They are still consistent and still good, but they weren't carrying anything super positive either. So for me, this category is going to be a 3 out of 5. And now let's talk about writing style. Writing-wise, I think Ryan Cahill is able to stay strong, and I think his prose has improved a lot from the first book. Sometimes there is a sentence here and there that are a bit more jarring, but aside from that, I enjoyed the book, and I think that's mostly personal taste, and you might not even notice those sentences, so take that into account. And as for pacing, I think there's some peaks and valleys, which is what you want, but I gotta say, there was a valley that for me was just a bit too long on the down low, a bit too slow, or better, was just verging on being too long, especially for a short story, because you expect them to be, the valleys and the mountains, to be quite fast. But luckily that one picked up at the right time, and it was just enough to keep me engaged. And partially this might have been because the story was so focused on character development and not as much on world building or plot, which are two of the categories that I have a lot of attention to. But anyways, for me, this category is a 4 out of 5. Could have been worse, could have been better. It's positive on the prose sense. Pacing has some issues. And last category is enjoyment. And this is a short story, like I said multiple times, so it is very easy for the engagement and the enjoyment to be good pacing or at a high most of the time, because everything happens so fast. I was definitely curious at the start to read more about this world, especially when I realized that we were going to read about Dane. I was curious to read about it and also realize what he had done throughout his life, because when he shows up in the second book, he's already a fully fledged adult and he has a lot of backstory that we don't really know. So getting to know that part was fun. And towards the end, the revelation and the conclusion of the arc was good enough. My enjoyment was high. Like, not spectacularly high, but I enjoyed it. But I mean, in the end, I wasn't looking for excuses to read the book. I was just reading whenever I would pick up my Kindle. So because of that, I'm going to give this category a 4 out of 5. And so we end this review. Just as a refresher, we have 4 for plot, 5 for characters, 3 for world building, 4 for writing style, and 4 for enjoyment, which gives us a score of 4 out of 5. This means that this short story sits right in between the first and the second books, and so it kind of looks like it's progressing in terms of quality. But in fact, it's a bit of a decrease from the second book, considering it was published afterwards. And I think my opinion of that is mostly because we don't pay as much attention to the world building, so the world felt a bit flat when we focused too much on one character. But I think it's still quite a fun short story. If you're a fan of The Bound and the Broken, I would definitely recommend you reading this because it does complete a piece of this cast. But if you've never read it, I would say maybe read the first, second, maybe third books of the main series. And then if you're still curious about who Dane is, what led him to be where he is, go back and read that short story. You won't miss that much. And now I guess my next destination will be the third book of the series, which is called Of War and Ruin. I'm curious. I'm not as curious as I was when I finished reading the first short story, but nonetheless, I will read it eventually. Now I want you to tell me what you think about it. Have you read this short story? Which one do you prefer? Do you disagree with me? Comment down below. I want to discuss more. And if you're new, don't forget, subscribe, like the content, and I'll be seeing you on Thursdays and Sundays. Hopefully, if all my Sydney schedule allows me to publish as many videos as I can. But for now, see you soon.